Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome back to YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Katan, today we're going to discuss the interview that took place this week on Al Jazeera's Inside Story. Now, the extreme weather patterns across the United States was the topic of discussion as some of the experts got together and they gave their thoughts on why we're seeing more and more of these extreme weather patterns taking place. So pay close attention as we look at this interview and how the experts are finally starting to admit what Yeshua Hawkins has been teaching for many years now is correct.
That's right. Extreme weather has gripped much of the United States recently. We've experienced weeks of scorching temperatures, raging wildfires, and destructive storms. Thousands of heat records have been broken and have been responsible for at least 46 deaths in the July heat wave alone. Now, a study released this week shows that the last 12 months have been the warmest on record for the U.S. mainland, and those numbers don't even include July's high temperatures.
In late June, millions of people were without power for days across several states as a violent weather system left more than a dozen people dead. Now, with extreme drought over much of the country, conditions are ideal for raging wildfires. More than 2 million acres have been engulfed in flames across the U.S. so far this year.
With roughly 400 news reports from the U.S. press covering the wildfires, only 3% mention climate change as a factor. Up until now, scientists have been reluctant to directly link the wild weather to climate change. However, a study released for the first time this week did directly link some recent weather events to climate change, including last year's heat waves in Texas and the UK.
Bob Deans, the Associate Director of Communications for the Natural Resources Defense Council, had this to say about just how extreme these weather events are. He said, "We talk about heat, drought, and fire. Heat, we've had temperatures of 112 degrees in Georgia, 113 in South Carolina. In Kansas, it was a scorching 118 degrees. Now, you leave a candle on your porch in that kind of temperature, and it melts like a stick of butter."
Amazing. He went on to say, drought, 56% of the country is now under drought conditions. That's enormous. We have crops withering in the fields, livestock are suffering, lakes are drying up. This is serious drought. And fire, wildfires as of yesterday have been more than 30,000 across the country, burning 2.7 million acres of land. So this is the face of climate change, he said.
Now, Michael Mann, a professor and director of Penn State's Earth System Science Center, was asked if these weather events are the warnings coming to pass and if climate change is causing this. Professor Mann responded, "What we are seeing now is a clear loading of the weather dice towards these more extreme temperatures. If you look at the past decade, we have seen all-time records for warmth in the U.S. broken at least twice the rate we would expect from chance alone. So far this year, the ratio is closer to 10 to 1.
Wow, he continued, "It's consistent with climate change. It follows all the models that you have with startling accuracy. But you can't pinpoint the moment or the event that actually is being caused by climate change."
Now, Heidi Cullen, the Vice President for External Communications and the Chief Climatologist for Climate Central, was asked how she would explain if a specific weather event is directly attributable to human actions.
Ms. Cullen said, "I think it is really important to keep in mind that there is a number of different factors that go into play in the creation of any given weather event. We can do attribution studies. Climate scientists do this, and in fact, we've studied, for example, the European heat wave of 2003. And what we were able to do after the fact was basically say that human actions, the burning of fossil fuels and other actions, basically double and possibly quadruple the likelihood of that heat wave.
Now, recently, the Natural Resources Defense Council, which Bob Dean is a part of, came out with a study that says climate change is literally killing us. One report said Midwestern flooding should no longer be called a natural disaster, but a mixed natural-unnatural disaster.
Sounds like a mixture. Bob Dean responded to these comments by saying, some summers are hotter than others, and there are a lot of causes for wildfires and drought. We understand all that. But when you say, as you pointed out today, we have just now finished the hottest year on record in the United States, 3.2 degrees higher than the 100-year average, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the most authoritative source in the world on that.
Now, Mr. Dean continued, he said, so when that's the background against which all these weather events are unfolding, it's important that we connect the dots on where we are headed and what we need to do to address climate change, mitigate its impacts, and prepare for it to adapt to its consequences.
Now, due to certain advancements, instead of connecting the dots of the effects of climate change years later, we now have the ability to connect those dots, so to speak, now with the events that took place just last year. A study by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the U.S. and the UK's MET, or Met Meteorological Office, has linked recent extreme weather events to climate change.
The study says 5 out of 6 weather events were caused by climate change. Last year's record heat wave in Texas was 20 times more likely to have happened due to climate change. It is also indicated that the drought that hit East Africa, resulting in a famine, was partially caused by climate change altering sea temperatures. And finally, last year's record warm November in the UK was at least 60 times more likely to have happened due to climate change than through natural variations in the weather systems.
Mr. Mann of Penn State responded, when asked if climate change had a human fingerprint as opposed to natural variations and fluctuations in weather patterns, he said, yes. And that's what the attribution studies do. They use models to provide estimates of what the natural variabilities would be in the absence of climate change. With those computer models, they can take a particular weather event and see how often it would have occurred due to natural weather patterns.
He continued saying, if those models showed that it was extremely unlikely that it was due to normal weather patterns, you could say climate change had a role. He also said, we can suffer many different consequences as a result of climate change shown through different weather events, including the wildfires.
Author Bob Dean said, this is seen on a global scale. There are children in Africa who have to walk at least 20 miles for a cup of clean water when they used to have fresh water locally. We have lost a third of our Arctic ice over the past 30 years. Now, this is according to photographs taken 14 times a day by the United States government over these past 30 years as proof of that. We're now starting to see the United States on the front lines of these changes, and that is why people are starting to take notice.
Now, Ms. Cullen said that if we continue on the path that we are currently on, we are putting ourselves in harm's way to a massive extent, and that we're seeing signs of climate change, and they will only get worse as time moves on.
Well, Jeff, these events bring to light the fact that mankind's sins are the cause of the earth mourning and fading away, just as the prophets showed thousands of years in advance, and Yisrael Hawkins is foretelling in these last days. Now, for a more in-depth understanding of the cause of these events, you can contact the House of Yahweh and request your free monthly magazine, the Prophetic Word Magazine. Now, when you call, ask for the June 2006 issue entitled The True Cause of Global Warming.
You can contact the House of Yahweh and request your free subscription of the Prophetic Word Magazine and monthly newsletter at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. Or you can call 1-800-613-9494. And for all calls outside the United States, please call the number that's on your screen.
Well, continue to stay with us, get your pencils, your papers, and your Holy Scriptures together, and prepare for the unfolding of the laws as Yisrael Hawkins brings light to a world of darkness. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thanks for watching.